Music isn't really my area. I'm not the type to know a lot of bands or history about the industry, so I don't really have enough knowledge to ever say what popular song would fit the best for any new stand we're introduced to, at least for sure, because I only know a very small number of the songs out there. But I'll walk you through why I think the next stand is most likely going to be Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. At least that's the conclusion I've reached with the knowledge we have for now. So first of all, the stand has two forms kind of like Highway Star. There are the rods that can descend on a target from a distance, and then the rods merge together to create something that can damage somebody on contact once they're in that area. This is a stand, and stands have a couple rules that ground them most of the time. And let's be real, the main villain wouldn't have something as goofy as a silhouette made from light rods that walks up to people and electrocutes them. So let's assume this stand isn't broken, and that the way it works follows ordinary stand limitations. In that case, either the way it's able to be sent out long distances is regional or has a very specific condition, or it needs to mark a target ahead of time, and then it just descends close to that target in order to attack them when it wants to. And the two design themes for it that we know are that it's made of rods of light that gracefully ascend and descend from the sky, and that its attack is mainly based on the idea of high voltage. When it enters its attack form, the rods connect, maybe to symbolize making an electric current, and then the first time we see it, it makes an ohm symbol, which signifies electrical resistance, before growing into a full silhouette. When the basic idea of electrical voltage is that it's the product of the current and the resistance of the material it's passing through. So if a circuit has high resistance, but a certain current's passing through it anyway, the voltage must be high, and a high enough voltage can overpower the resistance of another material making contact with the circuit and pass through it anyway, which would deal damage because resistance is how much the electricity in the circuit gets removed from the circuit when passing through the material by being turned into stuff like heat. So a good conductor has very low resistance and only a small amount of the electricity turns into heat, but a good insulator has high resistance, which means the current will not try to flow through it, but if it has enough voltage to do so, a lot more of the current will turn into heat, meaning it runs out faster, and this material heats up really badly. Human skin is a decent insulator, but if a voltage is high enough to get through it, it'll damage the skin, and then because the rest of the body has lower resistance, it'll run through it, generate heat from the resistance the body does have, and cause a lot of internal damage. Damage from electric currents can also be explosive. So all of this lines up pretty well with what the light rod stand does. The rods first connect together, giving it the potential to form an electric current. It then makes contact with the target so that the current isn't diffused by flowing into something else, and then, despite the high resistance of the rods, it creates those electric currents that are explosive within it, causing parts of its surface to puff out, and high enough voltage to pass through the target from the point of contact, dealing explosive damage to them and causing them to split apart. So what can this tell us about the stand user? Why would their fighting spirit be symbolized by high voltage that descends from the sky? There's lightning, there's the idea of descending from divinity, there's the thematic relevance of bonding, splitting, and electric charges in the part. But there's also a really straightforward answer if this character is kind of a red herring and not as important as they're teased to be, which is that the charge could just be symbolizing how they bottle up stamina or aggression. We were just introduced to the idea of a Marine task force member leading the current group of enemies, so someone who operates as part of a group who drop in wherever they're deployed to move in on a target and overwhelm them with the power disparity from the number advantage might personally be part of that task force because it lets them get out their aggression by firing a bunch of bullets into their target. Tapping into aggression to be quicker, more effective, and tuned into their environment is part of what people can learn to do to be more efficient in these kinds of squads. So chicken or egg, the ability would fit that kind of person. Now, I'm not saying this stand user has to be that Marine or the next villain of the week. It could even belong to a group of Marines or somebody leading them from a distance. In total, though, there are three main possibilities for what kind of fighting style this stand would seem to represent. If you travel with a group to physically get close to a target you then gang up on, then it fits the Marine suspect pretty well. If you personally attack a target from a range, like a sniper, then it would seem more like this would be the ability of a long-range assassin in the enemy group. So Mundra would be recon, and this member would be the actual combat-oriented one for security or cleaning up messes. But option 3 would be if this stand symbolizes how the user achieves goals by leading a bunch of underlings. This one makes more sense with how the rods aren't necessarily a stand body, but come together to make the silhouette of something humanoid. If they're somebody pulling the strings, and their pawns are like lightning bolts that shoot from their fingertips, then the ability lines up with that pretty well. But in a way that's incompatible with the aggression idea. The fact that the victims look like they're riddled with bullets wouldn't line up as well if the idea is they're some kind of leader who uses underlings up to accomplish their goals and tries recycling them as much as possible, because they wouldn't have to make the damage specifically resemble a bunch of gunshots. The exception, though, would be if this person is a sort of crime boss tied to the group from Howler's grandfather's flashback. The torture dance was referenced in this chapter, so if we're dealing with an underground criminal organization in this act of the story, then that works too. I just don't see that being as likely because it's kind of underwhelming for a boss's power, because usually you rule with some kind of competence or strength. But this would be somebody who seems to almost be completely reliant on having their underlings do things for them, like Rikiel controlling the thermal rods with Sky High. So maybe there's a connection there on purpose, with a stand that's similar to Underworld, then a stand that makes a debut appearance kind of like the stop sign with Bohemian Rhapsody, but then functions like Sky High. Those were Dio's other sons, so in this new universe, maybe there's some kind of party we're being introduced to that has some kind of historical significance. I just don't see this stand belonging to a leader, given the pieces of information we have so far, because any of that symbolism of the rods representing the pawns used by this hidden boss also works just as well if this is some kind of marine with an automatic or remote controlled ability, because they'd rely on assignments and numbers to get out their aggression, because then they would be the light rods themselves. Yes, the idea of this being a new party or a crime boss that was guessing how Howler was able to keep his family together would be really interesting. It's just that we would be assuming the existence and weakness of a character we don't know about for sure yet, whereas characters have already mentioned the possibility of a marine antagonist, and this stand fits that kind of person perfectly. The thing is though, this stand would almost be symbolizing somebody's capability as a soldier working for someone else. So I'm more inclined to think that this is the stand of that marine who does exist, but that they're not the one running everything. This would be somebody who can have discipline and stay out of trouble, or work for somebody with incredibly strict conduct and is comfortable doing so because this structure or hierarchy lets them live violently and indulgently. The kind of practical marine type person who, when they're not on the job, can work for you as a very effective problem solver because they want a little more out of life, and it's easier for them to work like Mike Ehrmantraut. What I'm trying to get at here is that the stand can be very practical, but it doesn't have to be special. It can kind of be straightforward like the other ones in the parts so far. Sure, it drops out of nowhere, and maybe it can make an endless number of rods, but it seems like it can only locate people through electric currents or conductivity, because that would have been why Mundra was given the tracking bracelet, and why the stand immediately went for the leg that had the bracelet on. And maybe the whole thing could be dealt with by sapping the power out of the rods somehow, and the stand could be much weaker than it seems. It would make the most sense for a self-contained stand ability given to a henchman to require them to physically make contact with a target to mark them before they could then summon their stand from any distance, because that would be the identification of a target, the creation of a mission by their boss, in other words, the orders from above, to then deploy and assassinate them. If we don't overcomplicate things, the heavenly ascending and descending of the rods of light can just be an aesthetic thing, and not a complicated rule for how the stand gets close to targets. And Mundra's comment about how nice the lights are could just be him being weird, as a way to reference the namesake of this new stand through his character's nature, as someone tied to ideas of guilt and the afterlife and salvation and whatnot. Basically, my mindset throughout this whole thing is keep the idea simple and straightforward, see what can be explained as a bit of quirky delivery, and then figure out what song reference from the few that I know would be the best justification for the quirky bits, and then totally work for representing a character that would have this stand ability. If the ethereal nature and the silhouette the rods take just represent orders from above and carrying out the will of another person as a group, then we sort of have an explanation for every detail of the stand. It's based on electricity, and with that, we have a potential answer for the light rods anyway, because that light could just be how the rods use up the current that runs through them, given their high resistance. Kinda like neon lights. I mean, alternatively, if this does belong to a marine, it could be based on Cherenkov radiation, since uranium rods need to be in the water to glow, so there could be something tied to nuclear power. And maybe there'd be a pun with the expression going nuclear, tying into the character's role in the group and how they're called in to handle things, or how their personality tries dealing with problems when following their feelings of aggression. But again, keeping it straightforward, high voltage rods that can be combined into whatever shape, and most importantly, release that voltage on contact with a target that they sense through electrical currents. And the fact they emit light is mostly cosmetic. This makes a couple songs come to mind. I mean, there is High Voltage by AC/DC, or Thunderstruck, or Sin City, but if you want it to be really straightforward, and also take into account the vibe of the story, this is why I would say it's The Weeknd's Blinding Lights. There's a reference to withdrawals fitting the drug trend of potential villains. There's how Mundra's killed on contact with the stand, and there's the blinding lights aspect of the whole thing. Now, here's the complication. Whoever's really in charge of this operation is the type that thinks they're in the endgame and willing to sacrifice long-term pawns to both get their hands on this lava rock and never have to worry about anyone else taking it from them in the future. And they're doing this whole intricate heist that's forcing our main characters to go through all these hoops and walk back and forth, taking damage and growing weaker and weaker. Right now, the only person that has a clue how to find the lava rock out of the main characters is Jodio. So more than anything, this is about getting that information from him, or helping him figure out that information, and then disposing of the entire group, because they're no longer needed. And they waited 9 months for some unclear reason. That was enough time for Charming Man to leave, that was enough time to have a child, and that was enough time for Jodio to get his driving learning permit and just begin being able to drive. Like, maybe there's a different level of legal responsibility or inheritance now that Jodio, the youngest member, is also over 16. But what I'm getting at is that if this group attacked Usagi's family, they would have also wanted to have some kind of insurance over Jodio. So maybe there is another reason for the opening scene of this act being Jodio crashing into a group of people's car and pissing them off. Because maybe the light rod stand user is one of them, and specifically targeted Jodio and his friends in this opening scene to plant the rod so they could eliminate them later by summoning it on them in the future. My money would be on the driver, the head of the group, because he's the one that actively takes a bat with him and starts making threats to the group. And if we're saying this stand user is one of the Marines who in their off time runs errands, but also likes ganging up on people to get out their aggression by letting it out on targets, and this person isn't the leader of the bigger group, but might lead a smaller squad, which is why they're an easy scapegoat, then this one guy is our best candidate out of the characters we've seen so far. I know with Point Blank, the answer was somebody we hadn't actually seen up until that reveal at the very end, so there was no way to guess Mundra ahead of time, but I do think it's different here, because this driver perfectly fits the potential symbolism of this stand ability, and that answer makes the structure of the act so far come together more. But also, I feel like there's a strong chance of this being the case, because if we look at our best song candidate, Blinding Lights, a big part of the song is that it's about somebody who's reckless and impulsive, and a bad driver because of it, which isn't fair to say about this guy because Jodio backed into him. But it's a completely different story if he was driving to encounter the group when they were all together, which fits Blinding Lights even better, since the broader point is that the person in the song is driving recklessly because they want to meet and make contact with someone. Add in the impulsiveness that fits this guy's personality, and the song would be a pretty good match.